What's going on, YouTube? It's your host, Bruce GNT. And for today's video, I'm a little bit behind, but I wanted to make sure I got as much information as I could because from what I'm seeing right now, this seems like something else dropped fairly recently. So as you all, or some of you may know, there's been an Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. Pretty much broke it, I want to say yesterday evening. I'm not entirely too sure about the time frame. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over the video and we're going to go over pretty much Biden's plan and how that's going to work out, because it's going to go over, I want to say, in 3 phases. In the next video, we're pretty much going to address how, even though this is a ceasefire deal, that doesn't mean that everything is just all fine now. Because at the end of the day, these countries still have their tensions. They still have their issues with each other. You know what I'm saying? Like Egypt, Israel, Kuwait, Syria, Yemen. What's going to change? What's happening with this ceasefire deal and what's going to come after that? What's been going on for the past few decades, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's the real question that's going to get talked about in this next video that I have. An MSNBC host, I can't remember his name, I can't really pronounce it either, but we're going to go over that. And in the last video, pretty much Israel has delayed the Gaza ceasefire deal, so we're going to see how that's going. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
The elements of this deal were what I laid out in detail this past May, which was embraced by countries around the world and endorsed overwhelmingly by the UN Security Council. The deal is structured in 3 phases. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. It includes a full and complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza, and the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas, including women and elderly and the wounded. And I'm proud to say Americans will be part of that hostage release in Phase 1 as well. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during Phase 1, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin. And the innocent people can have a greater access to these vital supplies. During the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get Phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when Phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, Phase 3, any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war. Those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest, the road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States. Hamas's longtime leader, Sinwar, was killed. Hamas's strongest supporter, Iran, launched attacks on Israel. And those attacks failed after my administration organized a coalition of nations to stop them. And after I ordered the U.S. ships and planes to come to Israel's defense, we also shaped Israel's strong and calibrated response, destroying Iran's air defenses, but avoiding an escalatory cycle of an all-out war. The United States also organized a coalition of 20 countries to stand up to attacks by the Houthis, including their...
Not to cut them short, but For those of you that like pay attention to the news and whatnot, you know why he's saying this, right? Why he's saying it like that. Like I said, I pay attention to how people are saying things and why they're saying it a certain way. He's saying that because there's a lot of contention about people saying the reason why this started happening now, a few days before Trump, got inaugurated. They're like, well, it's because of his influence. That's why he keeps saying that. Because I'm watching this, I'm like, why does he keep talking about? Yeah, this is the exact same deal I proposed. Like, yeah, this is my deal. And it's like, oh, okay, that's why. It's okay. Grandpa Biden, we know. For those of you that don't know, I don't rock with him because, one, I don't like career politicians, and then two, I still can't get over the fact that this whole dude sat up there and on 2 different occasions openly said, if you don't vote for me, you're not black, and people just went, okay, yeah, goofy.
Missile attacks in Israel. Then Hezbollah, another of Hamas's strongest backers, was significantly weakened on the battlefield, and its leadership was destroyed. With our support, Israel negotiated a ceasefire with them, and after that, Lebanon finally elected a new president who's not beholden to Hezbollah.
So I'm not going to listen to all this because I already know half of this, and then the other half is just him postulating. So,
role, is there a country or a leader that can come in and try to, again, to stabilize things?
Well, from an analytical point of view, people are choosing stability over progress. And I know that may sound a little bit nuanced, but the reality is people, certainly the governments of the Gulf region that say, look, we have to end the war. We have to end the collapsed states in Libya, in Sudan, in Somalia, in Syria now, in Yemen. You have to bring these countries to a cessation of violence and then be able to build them. So I don't think any one country is coming out and saying, hey, we're reformers, we're progressives, we're going to change, we're going to become more pluralistic and more democratic. And we're not seeing that also in the so-called one democracy in the Middle East, which is Israel. We're not seeing it move to a more centrist position. What we've seen it over the years has become more hardline, more extreme right, more intrinsic in the positions that it takes towards the Palestinians. And you now have members of the Israeli government who say they oppose this deal. They want to resettle Gaza. They want to annex the West Bank. And they've got an administration that's coming into power that may be willing to allow that annexation to take place.
I find your expertise in the region fascinating because you were there for the Arab Spring. You saw this moment of opportunity for the entire region, this moment of real hope that things were going to change. It didn't go that way. And now we're seeing, as you said, a hardening of positions, a hardening of conservatism or extremism or hardline coalitions within these states, even Israel.
Yeah.
Is there a path with the hardening that would lead to stabilization? I mean, democracy has been not working so well out there anywhere, even in Israel, it's having issues. So is a hardening of positions and we just want to get along, let us do our thing, you can do your thing. Is that the future?
Well, the problem is I think many leaders come in with this position, certainly in democratic countries like the United States, who come in and take a position that like, hey, I just have to hold this ship for 4 years. I need to make sure that America is not at war in the Middle East for 4 years, or maybe some do want to go to war in the Middle East. But the reality is, from our position, from our democracy, as messy it is, we don't necessarily support democracy in the Middle East. We don't necessarily support democratic change in the Middle East. We prefer stability. And so the end result is that when you get countries that begin their democratic journey, it is oftentimes messy. We may get leaders that we don't like. We just saw what happened in Syria, where the leader of that country is somebody that we had a $10 million bounty on their head for a long time. So the reality is now we're going to meet with that person. Are we going to be willing to let that country develop and evolve its own democratic practices, even if at times we may not agree with it every step of the way? And I think
I can answer that. No. America doesn't have a really good track record of other countries doing things that we don't like or the government doesn't like, and then us going, okay, we don't really have a good track record of that, honestly. I hate saying we, because for me, I don't care. Unless it's directly opposed to me, then I do care. But we don't have a really good track record. We really do not. Like, throughout history, we don't. But what he said is facts, because legitimately, what if they decide to go about democracy in the way they see fit, and it's democratic, right? But it just turns out in a way that's antagonistic towards us. What are we going to say then? oh, you did it, but not the right way. It's like, who are we to judge what's the right way and what's the wrong way? You know what I'm saying? How are we the lead authority? And then that's how we get issues. Exactly what he says is absolutely correct.
Our track record shows, and certainly those of the region, as we've seen after the Arab Spring, we prefer authoritarian governments. We prefer what is perceived to be short-term stability for long-term progress and idealism.
We've learned there are no clean decisions.
Right.
So I was able to find two videos that kind of basically said why there's a holdup with the ceasefire deal. Similar stories, because one is saying that it's mostly Israel. The other one's kind of saying it's Israel and Hamas. So we're going to go over both real quick, and then I guess we could talk about it after.
Well, as you say, the Israeli Prime Minister has come out with this, or his office has come out with this statement basically accusing Hamas of demanding some last-minute concessions. We've seen reports of Hamas denying that, putting the blame on Israel. And that, of course, has been the narrative throughout the course of the ceasefire negotiations over the past year. In the background, there is talk about the Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, making extra demands of Mr. Netanyahu. He's the finance minister. He is a hard-line nationalist. He is opposed to this hostage deal, and he wants the war to continue. Behind the scenes, unconfirmed reports that he's demanded some kind of written guarantee from Benjamin Netanyahu that he would continue the war once they reached the first phase of this ceasefire agreement. As you know, it's in 3 parts. There are also unconfirmed reports that Hamas has tried to introduce prisoners, Palestinian detainees, that it wants to be on the list for initial exchange with some of the Israeli hostages, high-level Palestinian detainees. These would be people that Hamas would consider political prisoners or resistance fighters, but that Israel would say are terrorists with blood on their hands. And those people, those more contentious names, aren't supposed to be dealt with until phase 2 of this negotiation. So, and I must stress, those are unconfirmed reports, but we do have a delay. That's not surprising given the history of the negotiations over the past year. But what it is doing is increasing the genuine anguish of people. The Palestinians were celebrating last night. The fighting is ongoing. The Israeli airstrikes will continue until the ceasefire begins. There have been 70 people reported already.
Yes, another thing. They had the Israelis, well, the Israeli government, I should say, Netanyahu. Yeah, they've been continuously sending like airstrikes. They're legit like, oh, the ceasefire begins on Sunday? We got time. So let's jump to the other video where they pretty much explain, not so much explain, it's also speculation as to what's going on, but I think they give a little bit of a different perspective.
David Sanger, let me start with you. You, of course, have been covering this deal closely. Is there anything to this last-minute hiccup with the Israeli cabinet? How serious is that here?
It could be. We don't know yet. I do know that up to the last few hours before they announced the agreement yesterday, Casey, Hamas was coming up with sort of last-minute things they were putting on the table. It's a very usual technique on their part, and the question is, can that be put down? But the bigger question is, who's right in this dispute between the two? And the answer is really both. So the deal is essentially what President Biden laid out in May. It also, you may notice, this is January. So, that deal did not happen. And I think the fact that they did link up so well, and that Steve Witkoff, who is President Trump's incoming Mideast advisor, was out there in lockstep with Brett McGurk, who is President Biden's equivalent for that and has worked for Republican presidents as well.
So before he gets too much into that, because we're definitely gonna go over that as well, it's not surprising. It's just like what the MSNBC host, Ayman, Ayman, what he pretty much said, it's all gonna be a mess, because you have, in this case, two groups of people that don't like each other, and for the most part seemingly, and this is all speculation, seemingly don't really want this war to end. So my question is, how long is this even gonna last? If it even kicks off, because it seems like people are just like dragging their feet. I hope that this can be taken care of quickly and as painlessly as possible. It won't be, sadly. That's just the reality of it. But we could just hope.
I think that made the difference because they were able to go to Netanyahu, send Witkoff, and say, this is the deal that Trump wants. And I think that sort of helped put it over the marker.
David, Tom Malinowski, who's a former Democratic congressman, he put out a very interesting thread on Twitter, the first of which says that this was Biden's deal, but as much as I hate to say it, he couldn't have done it without Trump. Not so much Trump's performative threats to Hamas, but his willingness to tell Bibi bluntly that the war had to end by January 20th. And he essentially goes on to say that while Biden did a great job working with European leaders, he did not bring the sort of thuggery to the table that is required in the Middle East. Do you think Malinowski's right?
Essentially, he didn't put that fear in them to think, oh shit, he might actually do what he says he's gonna do. Sadly, that's just a fact. He just didn't do any of that, you know. But that's really all that's gonna be for this video. If I feel like doing another video talking about that or who really deserves the credit, I might. Probably not, because I really don't see the point of it. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you think, like, because I know what I think. I feel, actually, I can't even say I feel. I know for a fact that Trump coming into office played a significant part. It played a significant role. We can't deny that. You know what I'm saying? If politicians themselves are going, yeah, he kind of did that shit, then who am I to disagree? I mean, especially someone that's not as informed as them. And just like what he had said earlier, this was proposed back in May. It's January. What's the difference? And you know what? I could be wrong. But the proof is in the pudding. But that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully this is a short one. If you enjoyed and you liked what you saw, leave a like. Leave a little comment. Tell me exactly what you're thinking. Tell me if you think I'm off base. Tell me if you think I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. I hope I do. I hope I know something. It's sad I'm up here talking all this yin yang bullshit and I don't know what I'm talking about. It's crazy. But yeah, just let me know exactly what you think in the comments. You know, subscribe if you want to see more, because there will be more of this. And yeah, that's it for now. Peace.